What is going on, guys? Nick here. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do operations at a seven-figure agency. This is part of a wider series that I'm doing on how I operate seven-figure agencies and how a lot of the people that I know that are successful and that even go from 7 to 8 figures do it. If that sounds good to you, then strap in and let's get into it. Okay, so first things first, I have a ton of people ask me on a daily basis, yo, Nick, this is where my company's at. This is how much money we're doing. What would you do to take us to the next level? And so every single time that I get a question like this, my first thought is, let's use the theory of constraints. The theory of constraints, if you guys aren't familiar, is a system that was developed by a really smart guy. His name's Eli Goldratt, like 20 or 30 or even 40 years ago. And the way that this whole thing worked is it was applied to factories and like power plants and assembly line type businesses way back in the day that were doing some type of manufacturing and that sort of deal. And so there are all of these like super high level concepts about how to correctly optimize your factory and your assembly line for massive and most successful throughput. And what's interesting is a lot of people slept on that book for like internet businesses. They didn't really think that it would apply. And so what I've done really over the last couple of years is I've just been applying the same factory idea of process optimization and whatnot to internet businesses to massive success. And I earnestly believe this is probably like one of my own major advantages over most other companies. And so I'm just going to give away that advantage right here. So I definitely encourage you, if this is the first time you're watching this, to like look into the theory of constraints. There's a fantastic book on this called The Goal, which is like a third-party sort of thing. It's like a third-person sort of like a fiction book that talks about like this factory owner or this factory manager and the things that he did to improve his throughput. But I'm going to give you a brief little summary right now, and that should probably be enough to at least hold you guys over. The way that the theory of constraints works is you need to conceptualize your entire business as a pipeline from start to finish. And so this right here is what I would consider an average business. This is your pipeline. So I just got this fancy new tablet and I kind of want to try it out. So let's choose a color here. The very first step in any business is basically your intake. And your intake, there you go. Your intake is usually lead acquisition, right? You're normally acquiring leads. If you're an e-commerce business, you're acquiring customers. If you're like an info product business, you're acquiring students, right? The first step is always going to be the intake. And basically the way that this whole business pipeline works is your money, your revenue, that was absolutely terrible. Your revenue is basically just how fast stuff can go from the intake of your pipeline to the completion end of your pipeline. And so, okay, let's pretend that this right here, that's a terrible color. Let's pretend that this right here is lead acquisition for an agency. What would your intake be in that case? Well, that's probably like your ad campaigns, that's like your referral campaigns, it's like your SEO, that's I don't know, like your Upwork jobs, whatever the hell you want to call it. But basically, you have all these sources that are pumping leads and kind of raw material into this pipeline. Maybe step one might be like I don't know, like onboarding. So now your leads are at this step where in order to take them from leads and turn them into clients, you need to have some type of onboarding process. Third step, or I guess step 2 in this diagram, let's just call this fulfillment. So this might be like, I don't know, if you're in an agency and let's say you're doing graphic design, this would be your team's ability to actually turn around the graphics. Fourth might be, I don't know, let's just do like payment processing. And this is a hypothetical example. In reality, you probably don't want to wait all the way to the end to do your payments, but I'm just trying to make this as simple as possible. And at the end, we have some type of completion. Okay, great. So now that we mapped out the business from start to finish, we got raw materials, raw leads coming in. We have some type of transformative process occurring where we onboard them and turn them into clients. We have a fulfillment process in the center, which is where you actually deliver the stuff. You have payments and then you have completion. The important part about the theory of constraints and the reason why it's called the theory of constraints is because in a closed pipeline, the fastest that the fluid in the pipeline will ever go is entirely determined by the width of the narrowest part of that pipeline. So that can be a lot to unpack. So taking a step back, basically the narrowest part of the pipeline is the rate limiting step. It's the fastest that anything will ever go. It's the bottleneck for a reason. It's the constraint of the whole system. So if we zoom out a little bit, what would be the constraint in this system? Well, obviously, if we just like try and judge the width of this, intake's pretty big, step one's pretty big, step two looks pretty narrow, step three looks pretty big, and then completion also looks pretty big. This area here, step two, which in our case would be the fulfillment of this hypothetical business, that would be the bottleneck. And so when I'm doing consulting for a variety of different business types, let's say like an e-commerce business or something like that, and they raise their growth issues to me or something about how they can't grow, what I'll do is I'll ask them questions and then build out a pipeline just like this for their own business with all the steps from start to finish. And then I'll identify what the constraint is or what the bottleneck is in the business. And then once I know that, that's step one, we have two options. Like, let's say we know that fulfillment is the bottleneck in a business, right? We can get like, I don't know, let's say we can get 10 leads or 10 customers a day. We can technically onboard like 20 of them if we so wanted, but we can only fulfill 5 of them. Let's say we could process 20 payments, and then let's say there's some final completion thing where we can do 10. Well, the rate limiting step of this business is that 5 fulfilled orders or 5 fulfilled projects, right? So we got kind of 2 options here. Number one is we can reduce the flow of the rest of the pipeline. If I learn how this pen works, we can reduce the flow of the rest of the pipeline to accommodate the most bottlenecked or most constrained step. So that would mean maybe we cut our lead gen in half. Maybe we let go of like 3/4 of our onboarding staff. Maybe we let go of 3/4 of our payment staff, right? What this does is this helps you improve margin. And so you're basically just trying to limit the flow of everything so that it matches that constraint, to cut costs upfront for advertising, costs for fulfillment, costs for staffing, whatever. And this can be really beneficial if you're like a really big company and you're just like doing way too much at the intake step, or you have like 1 million onboarding employees or some shit like that, right? This is what you typically call in the business like the reduction of bloat. And your margins can go up like 20, 30, 40%, which is nice. You make more profit. But a lot of the time, I'm not dealing with businesses that make like 30 or 40 or $50 million. I'm dealing with businesses that make, like $1 million a year or 2 or 5 or whatever. And the major problem at that level isn't reducing everything except for the constraint. It's increasing the width of that constraint, or basically like deconstraining the constraint. And so what that might look like in practice is identify the thinnest bottleneck, which in this case would be fulfillment, and then do a deep dive into fulfillment to determine what is it that is preventing us from being able to fulfill more projects. Do we need to hire more people? Do we need a more effective project management system? Do we need to like rethink what it is that we're doing from the get-go? Maybe our product is just inherently difficult to fulfill. Maybe we can take a step back and try selling a different product, right? Many, many different ways to attack that. In our hypothetical example here with my super shitty writing everywhere, we had 10 initially, onboarding was 20, the bottleneck was 5. Well, now let's say we hypothetically make this just a little bit wider, and I'm just gonna try really stupidly and make this is kind of fun actually. If you guys have never like drawn anything on a tab, I highly encourage you to. What we'll do is we'll try our hardest, and let's say we manage to grow this step of the pipeline so that instead of just being able to accommodate 5, we can now accommodate 10. If you think about it from an ROI perspective, the fact that we just took this 5, oh, that's not good. The fact that we just took this 5 and turned it into a 10 represents a 2 times improvement in our bottom line, which is pretty cool. Which means that we've essentially just grown the business by 200%. We're gonna have grown profits by approximately 200%. And this is gonna be one of the highest ROI ways to impact this particular business. Contrast that with like the reduction, for instance. In order to reduce expenditures in such a way that you would improve your total gross profit or your total profit remaining at the end of the term, you usually have to do a lot more. And so, increasing is usually the move if your business is small, and then reducing is usually the move if your business is really, really big, like 8, 9-figure company, that sort of deal. Okay, so that was a ton of kind of academic bullshit material that I'm just throwing at you, simply because I wanted you to understand what the mindset is behind, operating a 7-figure agency, as well as, in my work today where I'm consulting with 7 and 8-figure companies and attempting to process optimize and improve their bottlenecks. What you basically do is you'll do everything that I just talked about. You'll widen one of the constraints, and then you'll find another constraint and then widen that. And then your entire job is just going from one constraint to the next biggest constraint, to the third biggest constraint, to the fourth, so on and so forth, just until everything is as wide as humanly possible. There's as much lead volume and project volume flowing through the queue. And the second that that's done, your business is now, operating like a well-oiled machine. And that's the reason why they call, pipelines. It's just like the simplest and easiest way to model a business. Now, how have I actually applied this at my own seven-figure agency, and why am I even recommending you do this in the first place? I was operating a content writing company for a very long time called 1 Second Copy, which is like, we do books, blogs, magazine articles. Everything is fantastic from the outside in. But when we were first growing, the first few months were pretty rough. And basically the way that, I started this content agency was I tried to make it just like any other agency, where there'd be like, a consultation process where I try and figure out what it is about your business that we need to improve. I'd do like an onboarding process where we'd create a big content calendar for you, and we'd really go into like the nitty gritty of what made good content. We'd have like some very belabored fulfillment process. Then we have like a delivery process, and then we try and resell and upsell as often as possible. That business never made it past maybe $10,000 or $15,000 a month. The reason why is because if we go back to our theory of constraints graph, the intake might have been huge, but the onboarding was like super thin. The fulfillment was super, super thin. It was extremely difficult to accommodate all of the variables in, like a content writing business, because you have like all these different niches and all these different requirements, and some people do SEO this way and some people want SEO this way, and other people are using WordPress. There's just so many freaking variables that essentially our pipeline, if you could conceptualize it, okay, I don't actually know how to do this. I'm the type of guy that just says, fuck it, I'm gonna buy a tablet for my YouTube videos, and then doesn't spend even a minute trying to figure out how to use it. Okay, cool, so ignore the white there, but let's just pretend that our intake's really big, and then our onboarding sucks, our fulfillment sucks, whatever. Our intake was probably like 20 or something, and then everything else was like a 1. And so we were spending like 20 times the money that we probably should have been spending up front for 5% of the return, which is just stupid. So I asked myself, how do I apply this to my own business? And what I did was I looked at the onboarding, and I asked myself, okay, first of all, is this really necessary? If all we're offering is content writing services, do we really need to onboard somebody in the first place? And the answer turned out to be no. So if you recreate the business model, or, I changed the business model a little bit, I massaged it, and we were no longer like a company that did onboarding. We became a company where, you just pay us a set number of words per month, and then you can slice it, dice it however you want using a request form, right? So now no onboarding. How about fulfillment? For fulfillment, I just looked at the way that we were currently managing projects, which we usually hired like a very competent English native full stack writer. And then I asked myself, okay, I'm having trouble finding these people. Is there any way that we can change the way that the deliverable is built? AKA, the way that the article or the ebook or whatever is written, in such a way that we don't actually need to like have these super competent full stack writers be the bottleneck. Like, is there any way to just change this? And what I ended up doing was I separated writing an article into writing, editing, and QA. And then I hired ESL writers for writing, which allowed us to get way more first drafts through the gate. And then I hired a few editors, and some of those editors were also QA people. And the benefit of this now is, okay, great. Like, basically, instead of fulfillment being the bottleneck because we couldn't hire super competent or qualified writer / editor / full stack, talented people, we had so many first drafts, and then all we needed to do was just hire more editors to like make it better and easier and more effective for us to turn these things around. So this is a big word jumble at this point, but I guess what I'm trying to say is you can apply this same approach that may seem academic initially to literally any business with outsized results. You just need to have the time, energy, and I guess capability to just take a step back and try looking at it from an outside view. I had the ability to do so with 1 Second Copy just because we hit a certain revenue number, and that revenue number allowed me to be like, okay, cool, like I don't need to just eat noodles all day for the rest of my life. I can actually take a couple days off, try and build this shit out and figure out the best way to move forward. But I understand that not a lot of people can do that. And so in cases where you are fully dependent on that day-to-day revenue, and maybe you're making a little bit less money and you're still wondering exactly how to get started, you can still use the theory of constraints. You just need to be a little bit more intelligent about where you're applying it. You can't just like tear down your whole business and rebuild it in a day, obviously. You need to make smaller sort of iterations or nudges before you get to the point that you want to get to. Yeah, and then I think that's it for the goal. Yeah, so process optimization and all that stuff, super relevant, super important. One little nuance piece that I will say on that pipeline that I generated earlier, most businesses do not look like this, and so don't think for a second that your business is like this without like actually considering it. Most businesses are like this. Most businesses have way too much capacity everywhere except for intake. And so actually like they need to work on their lead gen first, and that's sort of the whole deal. So, if you're watching this and you're just getting started or whatever, or you don't really have like a big business career underneath you, I would say, just from like a first principles sort of view, the vast majority of the time you're going to be suffering from a constraint with lead gen. And if you solve that, a lot of the time everything else sort of solves. So I'd always just look there first before I start, trying to optimize my onboarding or fulfillment or whatever. But when you get to the stage where your intake is just significantly bigger than anything else, that's when you can apply, the theory of constraints methodology to really just fucking change the game and make you a ton of money. So I hope that makes sense. I had a lot of fun drawing on a tablet for the first time on camera. If you have any questions or anything like that, let me know. And until then, like, comment, subscribe, do all that fun YouTube stuff, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks so much.